She thought she married a man who could heal her heart, until she found her own portrait painted 100 years ago, with his last name beneath it. The sea had always taken what it wanted. That was the first thought that came to Elena Maren's mind the morning she buried her husband. The sky above Greybridge Harbor was the same flat, metallic color as the water, a gray so deep it seemed to leach the warmth out of her skin. The priest spoke, voices murmured behind her, and the scent of salt and lilies filled the air, thick and cloying. But Elena barely heard a word. In her mind, she kept replaying the same image. The overturned boat, drifting toward the rocks, her husband's jacket caught in the current like a ghost waving goodbye. They'd called it an accident, though no one could tell her why he'd gone out that night. The sea, they said, keeps its secrets. For 3 weeks after the funeral, Elena barely left her house. The curtains stayed drawn. The tea went cold on the counter. Her friends called, but she couldn't bear the sympathy in their voices. Every sound in the house, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind through cracks, sounded like him coming home. Then one afternoon, she found herself standing outside the Maren Foundation Gala, her late husband's charity event, now hosted in his memory. She hadn't meant to go, but something about it drew her in, like a tide pulling her forward. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polite laughter. People offered condolences wrapped in shallow smiles. Elena drifted between faces she barely recognized until she found herself in front of a tall man with a quiet, magnetic presence. "Mrs. Maren," he said softly, "I was hoping I'd find you here." His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that cut through noise without needing to rise. "Elena," she corrected automatically, blinking up at him. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "Adrian Vale," he said, extending a hand. "I worked with your husband years ago. I'm so sorry for your loss." She took his hand, warm, steady, and for the first time in weeks, something like air filled her lungs. He wasn't like the others. There was no pity in his eyes, only focus. And behind that focus, something unreadable. They spoke for only a few minutes that night. Yet when she went home, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The shape of his words, the precision of his questions, how he had known details about her husband's research that even she hadn't fully understood. By the next week, he had sent flowers, not white lilies, thank God, but blood-red dahlias. The card read, "Grief fades when shared with someone who understands." It was too much, too soon, and yet she didn't throw them away. Their paths crossed again in the weeks that followed. At first, by coincidence, or so she thought. The cafe where she took her morning walks, the library she visited to feel less alone. He seemed to appear with quiet inevitability, always with a gentle word, never pushing. He spoke little about himself. When she asked what he did, he said vaguely, "I invest in lost causes." There was a darkness to his charm, a calm intensity that unsettled her even as it comforted her. He listened the way no one else had, as if her every sentence contained a secret worth decoding. "You have a habit of apologizing for things you can't control," he told her one evening as they walked along the pier. "Storms happen whether or not we blame ourselves for them." She looked at him then, the wind tangling her hair. "And yet you sound like a man who's weathered a few." A faint smile touched his lips. "More than I care to count." By the second month, people had begun to notice. Her sister warned her gently, "It's too soon, Elena. You're still healing." Elena nodded, but inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, alive. Adrian's presence filled the spaces where grief had hollowed her. He took her to places she'd never been. Old bookshops, midnight dinners in candlelit restaurants, long drives down forgotten roads. But sometimes, when she glanced at him in reflection, in a window or mirror, she caught something in his face that didn't quite match what he was showing her. A flicker, like light catching on something beneath the surface. One night, she woke suddenly to find her phone buzzing with a message from an unknown number. "Do you really know who you're with?" Her breath caught. But when she showed Adrian the next day, the message was gone, as though it had never existed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, smiling gently. "You've been dreaming, my love. The mind plays cruel tricks when it's lonely." And she wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. The proposal came on a Sunday evening, under the soft orange haze of a setting sun. They were sitting by the water, the same harbor where her husband's boat had been found. The irony wasn't lost on her, though she said nothing. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small black velvet box. The light caught the silver band inside, glinting like starlight. "Elena," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, "you've lost enough. Let me give you something that won't fade." Her throat tightened. "Adrian, it's only been 3 months." "I know," he interrupted, his gaze steady. "And yet I feel as though I've known you far longer. There's a reason we found each other when we did." He took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against her palm. His skin felt warm, too warm. "Sometimes," he murmured, "when two souls meet, it isn't for the first time. It's a return." Something in his tone made her heart stutter. The air grew still, heavy. She wanted to say no, to tell him it was madness, that grief wasn't love. But then he looked at her the way her husband once had, not with passion, but with recognition. And so, trembling, she said yes. That night, as she packed away the flowers he'd brought, white roses this time, she found a note folded neatly beneath the vase. It wasn't his handwriting. "He knows things about me I never told anyone." Her own words, written in her late husband's script. The window rattled softly against the wind. Outside, the sea whispered against the rocks, the same rhythm it had the night her husband died. Elena clutched the note, her pulse hammering in her ears. She told herself it was impossible, that she was imagining it. That grief had a voice and a cruel sense of humor. But when she turned toward the window, she swore she saw someone standing by the garden gate, tall still, watching. And though the glass distorted the face, for a moment she thought it looked exactly like Adrian's. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, share, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now back to the story. Rain fell the morning of Elena's wedding, the kind that blurred the horizon and turned the world into shades of silver and sorrow. It drummed softly against the chapel windows as if the heavens themselves were whispering a warning. She told herself it was only weather. Rain on a wedding day was meant to bring good luck, wasn't it? At least that's what the old women in Graybridge used to say. But as the first thunder rolled across the sky, something inside her, deep and small and trembling, knew better. Adrian had insisted on a small ceremony. Intimacy over spectacle, he said, his voice like velvet and conviction. Weddings are meant for two souls, not an audience. It sounded poetic then, romantic even, but as Elena stepped into the quiet chapel, she realized how small he meant. The pews were nearly empty. Only 3 guests sat scattered across the rows. Adrian's lawyer, a woman she'd never met who looked like his assistant, and a silent man with the build of a bodyguard. None of her friends or family were there. He'd convinced her it was better this way. They'll understand, my love. Grief is a fragile thing. Let's protect what's new. Still, as she walked down the aisle, the emptiness pressed in like a held breath. The chapel itself was old, centuries, maybe. The wooden beams creaked with the wind, and the walls were lined with saints whose painted eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. Candles flickered unevenly in their holders, struggling against the drafts that whispered through the cracks. And at the altar stood Adrian. He looked impossibly composed in his dark suit, the candlelight kissing his sharp features. But what caught her attention wasn't his expression, it was his hands. He was wearing gloves, black leather, even here, in this intimate moment. She almost smiled. He had told her he disliked showing his hands, an old injury from years ago, he'd said. But the thought flickered through her like static. Why today? Her pulse quickened as she reached him. "You look," he began, then stopped, his eyes moving over her as though committing every inch to memory. "Perfect." The priest cleared his throat, fumbling with his notes. His hands trembled slightly as he began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." The lights above flickered once, then twice, before dimming completely. The candles guttered, shadows leaping across the chapel walls. Someone gasped softly. Then the lights steadied again, and the priest exhaled a nervous laugh. "Old wiring," he murmured. But Elena noticed how Adrian didn't flinch. He only smiled, the faintest curl at the corner of his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The ceremony went on, though the priest stumbled through his lines, forgetting words, losing rhythm. He glanced at Adrian often, as though uncertain of something, his voice cracking once or twice. Elena's attention wandered. The rain outside had grown heavier, thrumming like a heartbeat. Through the back windows, lightning flashed, illuminating the chapel in brief, blinding bursts. That's when she saw her. A woman sat alone in the last pew, dressed entirely in black. Veil, gloves, even her shoes gleamed wet with rainwater. She hadn't been there when Elena walked in. Their eyes met for only a moment, but it was enough. The woman's face was pale, lips bloodless, and her gaze, sharp, sorrowful, seemed to hold a warning Elena couldn't decipher. The priest's voice broke through the silence. "Do you, Adrian Vale, take this woman?" "I do," Adrian said, smoothly, without hesitation. "And do you, Elena Maren, take this man?" Her mouth opened, but for a second, the words wouldn't come. The flickering lights, the thunder, the stranger in black, it all pressed around her like invisible hands. Adrian's eyes found hers, steady, unblinking. "You're safe," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. She drew a breath. "I do." When it came time to exchange rings, he extended his hand, still gloved. The priest hesitated. "You may remove your gloves, sir." Adrian smiled politely. "That won't be necessary." His voice left no room for argument. Elena frowned, but said nothing as he slid the ring onto her finger, the cold band a shocking contrast to his warmth. When she reached for his hand to return the gesture, the leather met her skin with a strange texture, too smooth, too deliberate, as if hiding something living beneath. Her fingers trembled as she forced the ring over the glove. The moment it settled, the chapel lights dimmed again. Outside, thunder roared so loud the stained glass shuddered in its frame. The priest flinched, dropping his prayer book. "Elena and Adrian Vale," he said quickly, his tone unsteady. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Adrian leaned in, his lips brushing her forehead, whispering, "Forever, my love." It should have felt like warmth. Instead, it felt like a vow pressed into her bones, one she couldn't take back. When the ceremony ended, the guests vanished as quietly as they'd come. Even the priest hurried out, clutching his coat against the rain. Adrian lingered at the altar, his gloved hand resting lightly on her back. "We'll leave through the side," he said. "There's too much storm for the main road." Elena glanced over her shoulder. The woman in black was gone. Only a trail of wet footprints remained, leading toward the open door. As they stepped outside, lightning illuminated the sky, slicing it open in a jagged white arc. For an instant, the chapel behind them looked skeletal, its tall windows glowing with unnatural light. The car waited at the edge of the path, engine humming. The driver stood motionless, face shadowed beneath his hat. Adrian helped her inside, his touch firm but cold through the fabric of her dress. She looked out the window as they drove away, the chapel shrinking in the distance, swallowed by rain. For a moment, she thought she saw someone standing at the top of the hill, the woman in black again, veil blowing in the wind. Watching. The car turned, and she was gone. Later, in the flicker of the mansion's firelight, Adrian poured her a glass of wine. He still hadn't removed his gloves. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Elena hesitated before clinking hers against it. The sound was sharp, almost metallic. "Adrian," she said softly, "that woman in the chapel. Do you know her?" He froze for half a breath, barely noticeable, then smiled. "A mourner, perhaps. People wander in during storms." His answer was too easy, too smooth. She nodded, pretending to accept it, but her thoughts twisted. The rain lashed harder against the windows, and the wind moaned through the chimneys like distant voices. Adrian reached across the table, brushing his gloved thumb across her wedding ring. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Don't be afraid. You're mine now." Her pulse leapt at the word. "Mine." She forced a small smile. "I'm just cold." But when she looked down again, She realized his glass hadn't been touched. The red wine inside sat still, dark, and untouched as the storm raged on. Outside, the thunder rolled again, low, endless, like the echo of vows whispered too soon. And somewhere in the distance, a single bell tolled, though there was no church for miles. The countryside rolled past in waves of green and fog, the world narrowing to a single winding road that led to a house that didn't seem to belong to this century. Vale Manor appeared slowly through the mist, its tall spires piercing the gray sky, ivy crawling up its stone like veins. It sat high above the river, surrounded by forests so dense they seemed to breathe. Elena pressed her forehead against the window, watching the mansion grow larger, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name. Perhaps. Or dread. Adrian smiled faintly beside her, one gloved hand resting on the window ledge. Beautiful, isn't it? He said. It's enormous, she replied. Like a cathedral. His eyes flickered toward her. It's been in my family for generations. Some say it remembers. Remembers? She asked with a half-laugh. He smiled, but said nothing more. When the car stopped before the iron gates, two figures were waiting. An older woman and a man about her age, both dressed in black. The woman's face was severe, lips pressed thin. "Mr. Vale," she said, bowing slightly. "Welcome home." And Mrs. Vale. Elena blinked. Mrs. Vale. The word still felt foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit. Inside, the house was vast, the kind of vastness that echoed. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something older, faintly metallic. Portraits lined the halls, all men with eyes too sharp, too watchful. The chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. As she walked, she swore the temperature changed from room to room. Warmth one moment, a chill the next. At dinner that night, only the two of them sat at the long table. The servants hovered at a distance, never meeting her eyes, their movements silent and synchronized. "I feel like we're ghosts in a museum," Elena said, trying to laugh. Adrian's gaze flicked up from his wine. "Do ghosts eat dinner, my love?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe they pretend to." For a moment, he watched her too closely, as if the words had meant something more. Then he lifted his glass again, the red liquid catching the firelight, almost black. That first night, she couldn't sleep. The house creaked and murmured like something alive. The wind moaned through the chimneys, and once she thought she heard footsteps in the hallway outside their room, slow, dragging steps that stopped just beyond the door. She sat up, heart pounding, listening. "Adrian," she whispered, "did you hear that?" He didn't stir. He slept like the dead. In the morning, when she asked the housekeeper about it, the woman's eyes darted away. "Old houses make sound, ma'am. Wood settles. Pipes breathe. Pipes breathe." The phrase clung to her like cobwebs. By the third day, the mirrors began to fog without reason. Even when the fire was lit and no steam filled the air, she'd glance at the glass and see her reflection cloud over, as if someone were standing behind it, exhaling. Once, she wiped it with her sleeve and thought she saw another shape reflected, taller, standing close behind her. When she turned, the room was empty. The servants had grown quieter too. They moved quickly, eyes fixed on their tasks. When she tried to speak to them, to ask about the strange sounds at night, or the doors that opened on their own, they mumbled excuses and slipped away. Even Adrian seemed different here. He spent hours locked in his study, claiming business, though she never saw a single letter delivered. Sometimes, when she passed the door, she heard him speaking, low, rhythmic tones that didn't sound like any language she knew. One night, she knocked. "Adrian, are you all right?" The voice stopped instantly. Silence stretched on the other side. Then the door opened. He stood there in the half-light, composed as ever. "I didn't hear you," he said smoothly. "You should be resting." "Who were you talking to?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "No one, my love." She tried to tell herself it was her mind, the trauma, the isolation, the strangeness of a new home. But the house had a rhythm of its own. Sometimes she felt it pulse faintly beneath her feet, like a heartbeat deep in the foundations. On the fifth night, a storm rolled in. Rain battered the windows, lightning flashing through the halls. Adrian was gone. He'd left before dusk, saying he needed to attend to business in the East Wing. Alone, Elena wandered the halls, candle trembling in her hand. The portrait seemed different in the flickering light, the eyes no longer still but subtly turned toward her. She reached one of the long corridors that led to the basement, a place she hadn't yet explored. The door at the end of it was half hidden behind a tapestry. Her candlelight glinted off something metallic. Chains. The door was sealed shut, thick iron links bolted into the stone. The edges of the wood were blackened, as if burned. She knelt, brushing dust from the chain, and found a symbol carved beneath it. Two overlapping circles, one dark, one light, joined by a single line. Before she could trace it, a voice whispered behind her. Mrs. Vale. Elena spun, the candle jerking. It was the housekeeper, standing at the top of the stairs. Her face was pale, her voice trembling. You shouldn't be down here. Elena rose slowly. What is this door? The woman's eyes darted to the chains, then back to her. Old part of the house. No one goes there anymore. Why is it chained? The woman hesitated, then whispered, because it remembers too. Before Elena could ask more, a sudden crash echoed through the house. A door slamming somewhere above. The candle flame sputtered. When she looked back, the housekeeper was gone. Later, she found Adrian waiting for her by the fireplace. His expression was unreadable. You've been exploring, he said quietly. Your home is unsettling, she admitted. That basement. His gaze hardened just slightly. There are places in Vale Manor that should remain untouched. Promise me you won't go there again. His voice was soft, but the command beneath it was unmistakable. I just want to understand, she said. He took her hand, gloved as always, and drew her close. Some truths aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be endured. The fire crackled between them. In its reflection, she thought she saw a third shape standing behind them, faint, translucent, before it vanished with the next flash of lightning. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. Somewhere deep in the house, metal groaned. The chains, perhaps, or the foundation shifting. But when she closed her eyes, she could swear she heard it, a slow, distant sound rising through the walls like breath. The house was breathing, and it wasn't alone. The morning began in silence, the kind that felt too deliberate, as if the house were holding its breath. Elena woke to find Adrian already gone, his side of the bed smooth and untouched. Outside, the fog had crept down from the hills, wrapping Vale Manor in a shroud of pale smoke. She slipped from the sheets, pulled on her robe, and stepped into the hall. The air was colder than usual, damp with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Downstairs, breakfast waited on the dining table. A single plate of toast, steam curling faintly from a pot of tea, and beside it a letter. No seal, no name, just her own written across the front in uneven, hurried script. Elena. Her pulse flickered. She turned it over in her hands, the paper slightly damp as though it had been left outside before being brought in. The edges were frayed, the ink smudged. Inside, the message was short, only 5 words, but they were enough to turn the world on its side. Do not trust him. Her throat went dry. She read the line again, tracing each letter as though meaning might change beneath her touch. No signature, no explanation. But the moment she read it, something inside her shifted, not shock, but recognition. A quiet voice, one she had been pushing down for weeks, whispered, "You already knew this." When Adrian returned that afternoon, he found her in the library. "You're pale," he said, setting down his gloves on the table beside her. "Are you feeling unwell?" She looked up sharply, folding the letter into her sleeve. "Just tired." "The rain." "There's no rain," he said softly. Her eyes darted to the window. He was right. The fog had cleared completely. Sunlight pressed weakly through the glass. She forced a smile. It must have been the mist then. He studied her for a moment longer than necessary before nodding. "Rest, Elena. The house can be overwhelming at first." Overwhelming. That was one word for it. When he left, she waited until his footsteps faded toward the west wing, his study, which she was never invited to enter. Then she drew the letter from her sleeve and stared at it again. Do not trust him. The words burned. That night, she couldn't sit still. Her mind replayed the letter again and again, searching for its source, its reason. By midnight, she found herself in the corridor that led toward Adrian's study. The door was locked, of course, heavy oak with an iron handle polished smooth by use. But beneath the door, a sliver of faint light flickered. She knelt, pressing her ear against the wood. Voices. Faint, distant, not quite human in rhythm. A whispering, rhythmic chant like the rise and fall of waves. And then Adrian's voice, soft, measured, almost soothing. Her heart thudded. The words weren't English. They weren't anything she recognized. She backed away slowly, her hand shaking. As she turned, her candlelight glinted off something metallic at the end of the hall, a key hanging on a hook. It was small, tarnished with age, the kind that belonged to furniture rather than doors. She hesitated. Then, as if guided by instinct, she took it. The next morning, while Adrian was away in town, she began her search. It started in the East Wing, the part of the house she rarely visited. Dust lay thick on the floors, cobwebs clinging to the high corners. The air smelled faintly of rosewater and something decayed. Behind an armoire, she found a narrow door hidden in the wall paneling. The little key fit perfectly. Inside was a small room, no larger than a walk-in closet. And on the shelves, letters. Dozens of them, each bound in ribbon, each written in the same looping script. At first, she thought they were his business correspondences. But when she opened the first, her breath caught. My dearest Eleanor, you once told me the sea frightened you. I told you that was because it knew your name. It still does. Her hands trembled as she pulled another. Beloved Clara, you have a way of asking questions that cannot be answered. It is what I admire most, and what will undo you if you're not careful. Every letter bore a different woman's name, each one written with the intimacy of a lover, and each ended the same way. Forever yours, A.V. The final box she opened contained no letters, only a single book, a journal, bound in cracked leather. Her fingers froze when she saw the initials engraved on the cover. J.M. James Maren, her late husband. The room seemed to tilt around her. She clutched the book to her chest, heart pounding, and hurried back to her bedroom. There, with trembling hands, she opened it. The first few pages were ordinary, sketches of the boat, notes about his work with the Maren Foundation. But then, toward the end, his handwriting grew erratic. The man who offered to fund the expansion, Adrian Vale, he knows too much. About me. About Elena. He said she belongs here. I thought it was grief talking, but now? I'm not sure he's human at all. Elena's vision blurred. She turned the page. I'm going to the harbor tonight to end this. If I don't return, tell her to leave the house. Tell her not to marry him. The final line was a single word, scrawled so violently it tore through the page. Run. Her body went cold. The air in the room thickened until it felt like she was breathing through water. James had known Adrian. He'd met him, and Adrian had said nothing. A sound broke the silence, the soft creak of a floorboard. She froze. The door to the room stood slightly open. Elena. Adrian's voice drifted through, calm, low. Are you awake? She snapped the journal shut and slipped it beneath the mattress. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Yes, she managed. Just reading. He stepped into the doorway, the faintest smile touching his lips. You've been keeping secrets, he said. Her stomach turned. What do you mean? He nodded toward the dresser. You found the key, didn't you? For a moment, she couldn't breathe. His expression softened, but his eyes were cold. There are places in this house that open only to those who shouldn't enter. I warned you. She began, but the words tangled. He stepped closer, the scent of cedar and smoke filling the air between them. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my love. It can make us see things that aren't there. Her voice shook. Who were they, Adrian? The women in those letters. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Past lives. Ghosts. You shouldn't let them trouble you. The way he said it made her blood run cold. He turned away, walking toward the door. Get some rest, he murmured. The house can play tricks when you're tired. When he left, the air seemed to exhale again, slow and heavy. Elena pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the hammer of her heart. She had thought she'd married Savior. But now, the truth flickered like a candle before a gust of wind. She wasn't living with a husband. She was living with a stranger who had already buried her once. The house was silent again, that terrible, listening kind of silence that seemed to hum beneath the skin of the walls. Elena had not slept since finding her husband's journal. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the final word burned into her mind. Run. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to know what he meant. She needed to see what Adrian was hiding. The letter's warning still rested in her pocket, crumpled and smudged. Do not trust him. Beneath it, a second line had appeared in faint, new handwriting. She hadn't noticed it before. Perhaps it had been written in invisible ink, revealed by candlelight. The truth waits below. Below, the cellar. She waited until midnight. When the house grew still and the storm outside rose to a fever pitch, she lit her candle and slipped down the servants' corridor. The stone steps moaned beneath her weight. A draft coiled upward from the darkness below, thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic, like rust. At the bottom, a corridor stretched out before her, carved from stone and lined with iron sconces. None were lit. Her candle trembled as she stepped forward. Shadows moved along the walls like ink spreading underwater. Adrian had forbidden her to come here. He'd said it was unsafe, that the floor was weak, the air moldy. But now, she understood that was a lie. There was nothing weak about this place. Nothing decayed. This was a room that waited. She passed old furniture draped in white sheets, trunks sealed with rope, and a strange scent, something sweet, almost floral, that grew stronger the deeper she went. At the end of the hall, she found a door of iron and wood, bolted shut, chains wrapped around it in a pattern too deliberate to be casual. It looked almost ceremonial. Her hands shook as she reached in her robe and drew out the key she had found earlier, the one she hadn't yet tried. The lock accepted it with a reluctant sigh. The chains fell away, one by one. The door creaked open. The air inside was cold enough to sting her lungs. Her candle flickered wildly, and for a moment she thought the room was empty. Then the light steadied, and her breath stopped. Paintings, dozens of them. Each portrait hung in perfect symmetry across the stone walls, lit by thin slits in the ceiling that allowed moonlight to fall like silver blades. And each portrait was of her, not just her face, her exact likeness. Her eyes, her hair, even the same scar at her temple from childhood. But beneath each painting was a brass plaque, engraved with names she didn't recognize. Eleanor Vale, Clara Vale, Margaret Vale, Isabel Vale. And finally, at the very end, the newest canvas still gleaming with wet paint. Elena Vale. Her knees almost gave out. The candle slipped in her hand, wax burning her wrist as it dripped. She stepped closer, trembling. The portraits were not copies. They were too detailed, too alive. Each woman's expression was subtly different. Joy, fear, resignation. They were her, and they weren't. The realization came slow and heavy, like drowning. Adrian hadn't just had wives who resembled her. He had recreated them, again and again. Something moved behind her, the faint scrape of a boot against stone. Elena, came his voice, smooth, unhurried. She turned, her candlelight trembling across his face. He stood in the doorway, shadow swallowing most of him. "Why did you come here?" he asked softly. Her throat felt raw. "What is this place?" He stepped forward, and the door closed behind him with a soft thud. A remembrance. Nothing more. Remembrance. She laughed, a hollow, shaking sound. "They look like me." He tilted his head, eyes unreadable. "They were you." Her stomach twisted. "That's not possible." "Oh, but it is," he murmured, walking past her, his hand gliding over the frames like a curator admiring a private collection. "They loved me, each in their own way. Each promised they would stay." He stopped at the portrait bearing her name, until they saw the truth. The silence that followed was unbearable. "What truth?" she whispered. He turned to her then, slowly, deliberately. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "The one you've already begun to suspect." He reached up and began to remove his gloves. Her instinct screamed to run, to flee back up those stairs and never look back, but she couldn't move. The leather peeled away, one finger at a time. Beneath it, his hands were not hands at all. Black veins laced his skin like roots, pulsing faintly as though alive. They crawled up his wrists, vanishing beneath the cuff of his shirt. The skin itself shimmered faintly, almost translucent, as if something beneath it was moving, shifting like liquid shadow. Elena gasped, stumbling back. What are you?" He didn't answer. He simply looked at her, pity and something darker flickering across his expression. "This is what they saw," he said quietly. "This is what they could not love." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "You killed them." "No," he said. "They destroyed themselves. Their fear consumed them, just as it's consuming you." She backed away, candlelight shaking violently. "You're lying." He moved faster than human eyes should follow, suddenly before her, one hand gripping her wrist. His touch was cold, burning through her like frost. "Elena," he whispered, "I've waited lifetimes for someone who would not run." The portraits seemed to flicker in the candlelight, their eyes glinting wetly, as though watching. She struggled, but his grip was iron. "Let me go." He stared at her a long moment, and for a heartbeat, just one, she thought she saw pain there. Then he released her. She stumbled backward, the candle falling from her hand. It hit the floor, rolling, the flames sputtering and dying. Darkness swallowed them whole. In that silence, his voice came again, soft, almost tender. "You were supposed to be different." Her breath hitched. "I'm different." "No," he said. "You're perfect, just like the others." And then, footsteps, retreating, echoing. A door opening, closing, the lock sliding back into place. Elena sank to the floor, shaking, surrounded by the silent faces of women who looked just like her. The air smelled of turpentine and roses. She groped for the candle, but found instead a damp patch on the floor. Not water, but paint. Fresh paint. Still wet. Her portrait. Her signature. Her ending. The silence after Adrian left was a living thing. Heavy, pulsing, waiting. Elena crouched in the dark, surrounded by her own faces. The portraits loomed like sentinels, their painted eyes glimmering faintly in the scattered moonlight seeping through the cracks above. Her breathing came fast, shallow. He was gone. For now. But he would come back. She could feel it, that invisible thread between them tightening again, tugging at her chest like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The air shifted. The faint hum of the house above trembled through the stone walls. Somewhere a door opened. There was no more time for fear. Elena rose, grabbing the fallen candle from the ground. The flame had died, but the wick still smoldered. She struck a match from the box on the table by the nearest painting, her own face smiling back at her, so gentle it made her sick. The match flared to life. Her hand trembled once. Then she pressed the flame to the corner of the canvas. The oil caught instantly. Fire licked upward, devouring the portrait in seconds. The painted skin blistered, eyes melting into streaks of black. The brass plaque beneath it glowed red. She moved to the next, then the next. Each portrait fell to flame like a confession. By the time she reached the last one, her own, smoke curled thick around the room. The air shimmered with heat, the ceiling groaning as if in pain. She pressed the flame to the edge of her painted cheek. "I'm not one of them," she whispered. The fire roared back in answer. A voice came from behind her. "Elena." She froze. Adrian stood in the doorway again, but this time the calm was gone. His hair clung damply to his forehead, his coat half unbuttoned, his eyes burning brighter than the flames. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice low, trembling with something like grief. "You killed them." She spat, her face lit by the fire's orange glow. "You made them, us, things to keep, paintings to replace the living." He stepped closer, his bare hands outstretched. The veins beneath his skin pulsed darker now, like shadows moving through glass. "You don't understand. I saved them. Each of you. From death, from decay, from time." She backed away, coughing as smoke clawed at her lungs. "You call that saving?" His expression cracked, pain flashing through it like lightning. I gave you eternity. She hurled the candle at him. It struck his chest, scattering wax and sparks. His body recoiled, the firelight catching across his skin, and for the first time, she saw what he truly was. The illusion of humanity wavered like heat over asphalt. His skin split in fine, glowing lines, light seeping through as if his body were made of molten glass. The black veins writhed, spreading across him like roots digging through soil. His eyes were no longer blue, but a fathomless void, swirling with something ancient, a hunger older than names. The air itself seemed to bend around him, shuddering with the pressure of his presence. "Elena," he said again, but the word came out wrong, layered, echoing with voices that weren't his. "You were meant to complete the circle, to end the forgetting." "I'm ending it, all right," she said hoarsely. "Here." She grabbed a fallen oil lamp from the floor, ripped its cork loose, and hurled it into the flames. The explosion was instant, fire leaping from wall to wall, devouring the air in a single, monstrous breath. The portraits went up like kindling, their ashes rising in swirling, glowing fragments. Adrian staggered, his outline blurring, light pouring from the cracks in his body like spilled sun. The house shuddered. A distant crash echoed above, the first beam giving way. "Elena!" His voice thundered, the sound reverberating through the stone like a storm. "You can't leave. You're bound to me." "Then burn with me," she screamed, and turned to run. The corridor was a tunnel of smoke. The stairs groaned beneath her feet, every breath scorching her throat. She stumbled in the main hall, the grand chandelier swaying violently overhead, glass raining down like shards of frozen light. Flames licked up the walls, devouring the old portraits of the Vale family, the velvet curtains, the marble floor splitting under the heat. "Elena!" His voice chased her, not from behind, but from everywhere. It echoed from the walls, the ceiling, the very bones of the house. She reached the front doors. They were locked, of course. Her hands fumbled for the bolt, coughing, eyes streaming. The brass burned her palms, but she didn't stop. She threw her shoulder against the door again and again until the hinges screamed, and it burst open. Cold air hit her like a wave. She fell into the night, rolling across the gravel drive. The wind tore through her hair, whipping smoke into the dark sky. Behind her, Vale Manor burned. The flames reached upward, a monstrous bloom of gold and red. Windows shattered one by one, each a dying scream. She staggered to her feet, barefoot, dress torn and blackened. Her palms were blistered, but one hand still clutched something small and heavy. Her wedding ring. It glowed faintly, too hot to hold, searing into her skin. She tried to fling it away, but it stuck fast, burning brighter the farther she ran. "No," she gasped, clawing at it. "No." The ring pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Behind her, the burning manor groaned and collapsed inward, the roof vanishing into a storm of sparks. For a moment, through the inferno, she thought she saw Adrian's silhouette, still standing, unmoving, a figure of light and shadow framed by the fire. Then he was gone. Elena ran. Through the gates. Through the forest. Branches tore at her skin, roots snagged her feet. She didn't stop until the roar of the fire faded behind her, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees. Her lungs burned. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees in the mud. The night was vast and cold. She stared at her hand. The ring still glowed, faintly, ember red against her torn skin. She pressed her palm into the earth, hissing through the pain, forcing the metal into the dirt until it cooled. The light dimmed, but it didn't go out. Somewhere in the distance, she heard sirens, faint, unreal, like a sound from another life. She turned once, back toward the hill where Vale Manor had stood. The fire was still visible from here, a tower of flame clawing at the sky. It was over, and yet, beneath the smoke, she could swear she heard it, a single whisper carried on the wind, curling through the trees. "Till death do us part." Her hand throbbed. The ring, now dull, ash-gray, rested in her palm like a curse that refused to die. Elena closed her fingers around it, and for the first time, she realized she wasn't free. Not yet. It took 3 weeks before she began to dream again. The sea helped. Its rhythm, endless and patient, smoothed the jagged edges of her thoughts. Every morning, Elena walked the shoreline of the small coastal town that now called her its newest stranger. She had rented a modest cottage at the edge of the cliffs, whitewashed walls, salt-worn windows, and a porch that faced the gray horizon. She told the townspeople her name was Clara Vale. They didn't question it. They rarely questioned anything here. The quiet suited her, the gulls, the scent of brine, the fog that rolled in each evening like a curtain closing over her old life. She had nothing left of the past except one thing, the ring. It sat locked inside a wooden box on her bedside table, wrapped in cloth and salt. She told herself she kept it only to remind her what love had cost. But sometimes when she passed too close, she swore she felt it hum, a faint vibration like a heartbeat muffled under earth. She'd moved it to the shed once, buried it beneath old tools. The next morning, it had reappeared on her nightstand. So she left it there, locked, waiting. Like him, the nights were worst. Sleep came in fragments, shallow, trembling pieces that dissolved with every creak of the floorboards. The sea whispered against the rocks, and sometimes, when the wind changed direction, it carried other sounds. Footsteps, a man's voice, low and almost tender, calling her name. Elena. The first time it happened, she bolted upright, heart hammering. But when she ran to the door, there was nothing. Only fog curling thick across the dunes. She told herself it was the tide, the echo of her memory, the mind's cruel trick. But on the 7th night, she found footprints in the sand, large, bare, leading up to her porch and then vanishing mid-step as though the man had melted into air. One afternoon, while gathering driftwood, she met an old fisherman mending nets by the pier. His face was weathered, his eyes pale as stormlight. "You're the widow," he said simply, not unkindly. "The one from the papers." Her breath hitched. "I think you're mistaken." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. Still, you've got the look of someone who's run from fire." She didn't answer. The man went on. "Old houses like that, they remember. Some say what burns doesn't always die." He paused, glancing toward the sea. "Sometimes it just changes shape." That night, she dreamed of Vale Manor again, but it was whole, untouched by flame. The windows glowed with golden light. Inside, a waltz played faintly, echoing through the halls. When she looked closer, she saw herself dancing, not with Adrian, but alone, her reflection in every mirror, smiling wider than she was. She woke gasping, and the box on her nightstand was open. The ring lay inside, gleaming faintly though the room was dark. It pulsed once, twice, in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat. She slammed the lid shut and locked it again, her hand shaking. The next morning, she bought a small safe from the pawnshop in town. The shopkeeper, a kind old woman with clouded eyes, wrapped it in paper and whispered, "Whatever you're keeping in here, make sure it wants to stay." Elena smiled tightly. "That's the plan." She placed the box inside the safe, sealed it, and slid it beneath her bed. For 3 days, the house was quiet again. Then came the tapping. It started faint, a soft tick, tick, tick against the window at night. The sound of something metallic brushing glass. The first time, she ignored it. The second, she pressed her ear to the wall, convinced it was just a branch. But the third night, the sound grew louder, moving from window to window, circling the house, like someone tracing the outline of her life from the outside. "Elena," the whisper came through the keyhole. She froze where she sat, every muscle turning to stone. The voice was soft, not the monstrous, echoing tone from that night in the cellar, but gentle, familiar. The voice that had once told her she was safe. "Elena, open the door. It's cold." Her hand drifted to the drawer where she kept the key to the safe. "No," she whispered to herself. "You're gone." A laugh came, low, melodic, the sound that used to make her chest ache with love. "Am I?" The lamp flickered. The clock stopped. And then silence. By morning, the world seemed almost normal again. The gulls cried. The sea rolled. But when she stepped outside, she saw it, carved into the wood of her doorframe. A A single word, traced by something sharp and deliberate. Hours. Her knees nearly gave out. She packed a bag, ready to flee once more. But where would she go? She had changed her name, buried her past, crossed countries. And yet, he had found her. Or perhaps he had never left. That night, she lit every candle in the house and sat by the window, watching the horizon. The sea reflected the moonlight, pale and trembling. She thought of all the faces in those portraits, the women who had come before her. Had they, too, tried to run? Had they heard his voice, soft as rain, at their door? The thought chilled her more than the wind ever could. Just past midnight, the fog thickened again, dense silver, swallowing the world. And then came the knock, not the timid sound of a stranger. 3 steady, deliberate raps, the rhythm of certainty. Elena's pulse stuttered. Her gaze flicked to the safe beneath her bed. The faintest glow bled through the metal seams, like something breathing inside. The knock came again. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. Barefoot, she crossed the room, each step echoing too loud in the quiet. At the door, she hesitated. Her hand hovered above the handle. The air felt charged, the kind of stillness that comes before lightning. "Who's there?" she whispered. A pause. Then, "You know who." She swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "You're not real." A low chuckle. "You keep saying that." Her fingers tightened on the handle. "You died." A long silence. Then, almost tenderly, "Love doesn't die, Elena. It remembers." Her breath hitched. Her heart screamed to run, to hide. But something stronger pulled at her, the same gravity that had drawn her to him the first time. The pull of the stranger she had married. She turned the lock. The door creaked open, and there he was, standing in the fog, the same dark coat, the same half-smile that once made her feel like the world had stopped just for them. His skin looked whole again, human. His eyes, blue, soft, familiar. For a heartbeat, she almost believed it. He stepped forward, the fog curling around his boots like living smoke. "You kept the ring," he said. Her lips trembled. "Why won't you leave me?" He tilted his head, the same way he had on their wedding day. "Because, my love." He reached out a gloved hand, new gloves, black as before, and smiled. "You never took it off?" Her breath caught. She looked down. The ring, the one she had locked away, gleamed once more on her finger. She hadn't felt it slip on. She hadn't even noticed. Her scream caught in her throat as he leaned closer, his breath cool against her ear. "Till death do us part." The candles flickered. The door slammed shut. And in the quiet that followed, only the sea remained, whispering, endless, patient. When I opened it, he smiled, exactly as he did on our wedding night. "If love could follow you past the grave, would you dare to open the door? What if the man you loved never died, just waited? Would you recognize the devil if he still smiled like the man you married?" Thank you for watching this story to the end. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Click on the image showing on your screen right now, too. Watch the next one.